Welcome. In this episode, we're going to discuss one of the biggest reveals at E3 2016, which was Resident Evil 7. A demo has also been released, and we've all played through it multiple times. We have a lot to discuss, so let's get to it. I'm Kevin Allen. This is Greg Smith.
That's me, and I'm with Chris, the Master of Unlocking, McDonald.
Very fitting.
Yeah.
That one did catch me really off guard.
So we'll start off with what we thought when the game was officially revealed at E3. What did you guys think?
Yeah, I didn't even know what the hell I was watching until it revealed that it was Resident Evil. When it first came on, I was kind of like, yeah, this must be a new Silent Hill game. And then Resident Evil at the end, I'm like, what? I was like, why? Resident Evil, there was no action, there was no explosions, there was no Leon or Chris, or punching boulders. Like, what's going on? Why is this horror? But to be honest, that's what we've been asking for, and we're getting it. So I just want to see where this goes. But overall, confused but happy that we're getting horror.
Chris?
For me, we didn't actually see Resident Evil till the end, which obviously was a very tactical decision because it is very different, and they want to sell people on what was shown before people knew what it was. I liked what I saw as a game. I thought it showed a lot of promise. Was clearly taking a lot of influence from elsewhere. It wasn't the most original teaser we'd ever seen, but I did think what it was showing was actually showing a lot of promise and did give me a lot of intrigue. When Resident Evil came up, it had definitely sold me as a game. I don't think it represents I didn't think it represented what Resident Evil was, and it was very much a different brand of horror than what Resident Evil is. But Resident Evil as a brand had been in such a bad place for a while, and my opinion was, if this is the direction it takes to at least get a good game out of it, then considering where the brand's at, I'm okay with this.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the reveal was one of the absolute most shocking moments of the entirety of E3 2016. When that happened, I was just blown away when the logo came up. Once that sunk in, though, I did start having fears because at the time no one knew it was Resident Evil. That's why it was such a shock, because in a lot of ways it didn't represent Resident Evil, so you didn't put the two together at the time. So it started to sink in, and I started to have fears that maybe it wasn't going to be representative of the identity of Resident Evil. But since then, a demo has released, and we've all played it multiple times. So where do you stand on the game now?
Well, I mean, like I said, I've gone through it a good few times now, and during my first playthrough, again, I didn't think it was Resident Evil. The first thing that a lot of people will obviously agree with me here on is that I felt like I was playing the second part of PT. It was just too similar, and I knew it took the kitchen demo and kind of ran with that. That was displayed a previous year. We didn't know at the time, obviously, that Resident Evil 7 was in development, or what the hell we were going to get with Resident Evil 7. When they said they were going to go back to horror roots, we were just expecting maybe fixed camera angles or more of what we've seen in the Revelation games.
Yeah.
But obviously keeping the behind the shoulder camera angle. But I did not think we would get a first person game, so I was really surprised by that. But the actual gameplay itself, like you said, it wasn't Resident Evil at all. We've not had a first person Resident Evil in the sense that the way that this demo played. We've had Resident Evil Survivor, and we've had Dead Aim and several games like that, but they still had a lot of elements from the Resident Evil games. There was no elements there was no herbs, there was no zombies, no typewriters, or familiar music. Until right at the end of the demo, we got like a kind of a mansion-y kind of sounding music when it told you it was coming in 2017 and stuff. But apart from that, you could make the argument as well that it was very Resident Evil because it was very slow paced. You done a lot of backtracking. You needed keys for everything. There was puzzles to solve. There probably still is puzzles to solve that we've not solved them yet. It was very atmospheric. The only letdown I will say is that stupid redneck that obviously punches you at the end of the demo. That just, again, I suppose you could say, well, we dealt with similar looking characters in Resident Evil 4. And yeah, a little bit like that. But then that was just, hopefully, because they said that the game itself, this demo was not part of the main game, this is just a prologue, and it's just giving you a teaser, an example of the direction they're doing this game, the way that it's going to, the gameplay, the way that it's going to unfold, the certain mechanics of the game are going to play out like this. For those that have found the axe, you can obviously see that you can wield melee weapons and just hit a bunch of boxes and stuff to get a feel for the game using that. But overall, it's difficult still to come to terms that it's Resident Evil, just due to the fact that it seems to be borrowing a lot of gameplay from the likes of PT and Outlast in terms of what horror is doing now, rather than going back to what Resident Evil was. But for a franchise that's been on the go now for 20 years, it's, your gameplay and stuff is going to get stale, and you are going to have to just keep reimagining things in order to keep the games fresh and keep them more, now to what we're used to. You couldn't just keep releasing Resident Evil games in the formula of the first 3 games in Code Veronica. By the time Code Veronica came out, that was getting a bit stiff for the gaming. Gaming had advanced and Resident Evil hadn't, so you needed a makeover. And we were getting, by the time of Resident Evil 6, we were getting sick of the explosions in the actiony, over-the-top action games. They were no longer horror, and the horror elements were slowly going away as well. The only thing that really remained was the characters and herbs by the time Resident Evil 6 came around. So it is a drastic change going from what we're used to like a first-person PT kind of horror experience, but maybe it's the change that we need. So yeah, I mean, Chris, what did you think?
I went into the demo with these hopes. Like, I was of the opinion, it doesn't look like Resident Evil, but my thought was, if they tackle an idea, it looked like a very intimate story set in this, like, rickety shack, and I thought if a lot of the game captures this mystery side and you're kind of trapped in this small area building and investigating what's going on here, and it could at least capture the original game in that sense, that would be quite cool. And I went in the demo with hopes, and it started off well for me, but when I finished the demo, and I went through it several times, but even at the end of my first playthrough, I always had to feel this way, and after getting some of the different endings, I actually thought it was dreadful, and it kind of has killed all the momentum and hope I had for the game. The entire thing feels like it's just a bad clone of PT, and my biggest problems with it is that it copies a lot of things PT did without understanding why PT did any of those things and what those things meant in PT. Like, they want you to go through and repeat the game and find different things, but in PT you were doing that, you were going through this small area repeated times because that was part of the narrative, and doing things and getting different results was part of the narrative. As long enough that you couldn't escape it and you were forced into these repeated cycles. In Resident Evil demo, it just kind of wants you to trial and error, go through it to see if you can get a different end result. And at the end of the day, the only difference is you get the exact same ending, but it just happens to you in a different place.
Well, from what we've seen so far.
Yeah.
From what we've seen so far, yeah. There might be more, but I don't expect there to be a huge amount more. And already, we found like 4 different endings that are all the same. Like, even if there is more, there's 4 endings we went to the effort of putting in, and they're all the same. 3 of them more so than 1, because the first ending where you just get out, whereas the other, you at least have the phone and the picture that's slightly different, but then the other 2 endings are literally just the exact same, but the phone call has 1 line of cryptic dialogue, there's a different line of cryptic dialogue that all really feel like they mean nothing. Like, it doesn't feel like meaningful cryptic dialogue, it just feels like cryptic dialogue for the sake of being cryptic to try and be interesting. And I now have this problem that if they can't even replicate a template well, like they're clearly trying to copy exactly what PT did with his demo, and when they have an actual template and they can't copy it well, I can't really have faith of them expanding that into a full game when there's no template of that. But then in interviews, they've really been playing down the idea that this is going to be reflective of how the game plays in any way at all, and that it's just tonally similar. But then that just makes the demo seem to me like this really cheap attempt to copy the viral success PT had, and it's such an underhanded thing to do. And it also still gives me this idea that they don't know what to do, and whatever they turn out, even if it's not, you know, a PT clone, is still going to be insanely derivative of where the industry is at, and probably copying things in a way that doesn't work how it did in the original game, and they clearly don't understand why that worked in the original game. Like, it does just leave me with this complete lack of faith. And I hope
The
it's
thing
prove me
is,
wrong,
well,
but
the thing is, like, it's not going to be a complete PT clone, because they did say, look, it is going to look a lot like PT from this demo, but once the actual game comes in, it's not going to be anything like the demo. It's going to be set in a plantation mansion rather than like a farmhouse. It's going to be more classic Resident Evil exploring. And they also said itself, they're not giving away whether it's going to be zombies or humans or monsters or whatever you're fighting. But if they do go down the road of like ghosts and spirits, then people are again going to draw the conclusion that they're copying PT, but not necessarily, because the original Resident Evil 4 was spirits and ghosts that Leon was fighting in that weird castle setting or whatever it was. So Resident Evil has tried that before, and not a lot of people know this, but Resident Evil way back in 1995, before it was released in 96, started off as a first-person game. So they're going back to things, not a lot of people do know this, but it's things that have really been in the franchise's history since the very beginning. So even though it's new as a public release, they have kind of tested the waters with these kind of game mechanics and gameplay systems before. So, you know, it is different. It is easy to judge a game on a demo that's so similar to PT. And yeah, they probably have taken ideas from PT, but PT's dead. We're never getting PT. And Resident Evil is a franchise it's like a wounded animal. It needs to recover and get back on its feet.
I do think on that note you misunderstood me a bit, because I did actually address the fact that they've said this demo isn't going to be reflective of the actual game, and I'd moved on to talking about where I'm at with what I think for the game with what they've said. I had moved on from the demo to what they're seeing at the game, but the demo still just leaves me with this impression that even the game that's going to have actual combat is going to have significant enemies. They said they wanted it to be more significant threats. We know there's herbs, we know there's puzzles, but it still left me in this place that I believe that they still don't know what to do, and whatever they put out is going to still be incredibly derivative of the rest of the genre and replicating things without an understanding of why they worked in the things they're copying it from.
Yeah.
And on the topic of the original game being first person before it was released, it's a nice bit of trivia, but it's honestly kind of irrelevant in my mind, because that was never the game anyone got, that never became the series' identity. It's like when they released that dreadful Bomberman game that looked nothing like Bomberman, was trying to be this edgy, realistic take, and their defense was, this is based on the original box art we had drafted up. And it's like, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That never became the identity of the game that it's had for all these years. It's essentially another IP at this point. You should have just labeled it something else. But yeah.
See,
what about you, Kev?
That's my. You've both kind of touched on it, but that's part of my problem going forward, is that they're giving reassurances of things that are going to bring back elements of its identity, but it's hard to have much belief or faith in the idea that the end result isn't still going to be derivative because of how the demo is. It's clear that in a lot of ways they're just going with what's popular right now for the genre, which is first person. There have been so many first-person horror games in the last few years, and even if Capcom had ideas of first-person or ghosts, those things never came out. It's clear that what sparked this is current industry trends, and that's what's given them the push to actually fully go ahead with it this time.
To be fair, though, that's exactly what happened with Resident Evil 4. It
definitely was, but this is much more drastic, I'd say. And in some ways, Resident Evil 4 was still a natural evolution for Resident Evil. Like, it wasn't a huge change the way this is. And to me, it's just Resident Evil was a pioneer. Like, it essentially invented what it was doing. And
Yeah.
now it's sort of sad to see that Resident Evil's having to follow trends to stay relevant. I understand that's a battle that long-running franchises are always going to have. You're always trying, like you touched on it earlier, you're always trying to keep things fresh, but I just wish that in doing so they weren't so transparent about it. And not just that, if you are going to be derivative or be heavily influenced, I'd like it if they had their own things to say, or their own elements that were of their own. PT had a message, it had something to say, and I never ever felt like the demo had a message or anything to say. It felt like it was just there to be there, and it just didn't have any of the inventiveness or imagination that PT had had. I will say though that the reassurances they're giving about the identity do leave me in an interesting place where I had a different journey with the demo from you guys, where I actually went in fearing the worst, like straight away, that it wasn't going to be Resident Evil. And while that ended up being true, PT was intended to be different from the final product too. So in that sense, I do expect that the full game is going to be more Resident Evil.
Just
than what
remember what it says exactly at the beginning of the demo. It says something along the lines of, what you're about to play is not going to be in the main game. It says that quite clearly. It's not basic. We're not supposed to be playing the final version of the game. This game comes out in January. You know what I mean? Like, we're going to see official gameplay from this game probably throughout the summer. There's going to be more videos released, more information. All we have right now is speculation. They've been very tight-lipped on what info they have revealed to us.
Speaking of that, though, that is a dangerous path in a way, because while it's copying the marketing campaign of PT, it is kind of worrying, because I've noticed that Resident Evil has gained a relevancy among the public more than it's had in years, that Resident Evil now matters again. It's one of the things I like, is that I'm just glad to see that Capcom matters again in some way. But how is it going to be when the game comes out and it doesn't represent the demo, but all those people that came on board and cared again because of the demo then get given a game that's nothing like it? Like, I do wonder how that's going to go down.
It's a very dangerous game, and in a way it's a gamble as well. You're kind of playing Russian roulette with your franchise.
Yeah.
It's difficult to see what the outcome will be, especially as well that Resident Evil 2 is being remade, and that's probably going to be back to fixed camera angles and classic gameplay. But you can also, the thing is though, in this demo there was classic gameplay elements of Resident Evil in there. You had an 8-item inventory box, and you could look at items, you could examine them the way you could in the first Resident Evil game. Sound effects were very similar to the original Resident Evil games. You were finding lockpicks and drawers and stuff. A lot of it was just, a lot of it did speak to me, and it spoke to me in Resident Evil language. It definitely seemed like it was trying to be, or at least trying to show you that it can be Resident Evil. It's not just a random game. It had little subtle elements in there. And then, not to mention as well, like, obviously it's been out for a few days now. Everyone's had a chance to play the demo, and there's already a lot of like speculation and rumors and people. So the common ones I'm hearing right now is the woman on the phone is Ada, which I think shit. Yeah. I don't believe that one.
I don't believe it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They've also stressed. So just on that subject, the director, I mean, this could also be misinformation, but in interviews when the director was asked about the idea of returning characters, returning the Umbrella Corporation, which we do have that hint of Umbrella, but when he was asked about characters and Umbrella and everything returning, he really stressed, no, nothing is.
The thing is, like, I think he did, after he said that though, he did say there would be a few surprises, so you can look at that either way. But the other thing I was going to say, which has been pointed out, and I'm in two minds about this one, but it's not really in the demo, but it's more in the trailer. Do you remember there being like a picture of a young kind of looking woman, maybe in her early 30s or so, and it had her like eyes kind of scored out with a black kind of paint?
Yeah.
People have been comparing that to a picture of Rebecca Chambers and what she could possibly look like. You know,
Right. Yeah.
10 years on from now, possibly 20 years on. Um, that could be her, but then again, that could be the surprise. You know what I mean? Like a kind of smaller character like her reappearing. Um,
Yeah.
it could be a complete. You know, they could really shock us and bring back a character that no one's expecting to ever see again. Like one of those like delusional kind of dudes who have lost their mind could be Billy Cohen, and you know,
Yeah.
they could be characters like that you've never really expecting to ever see again. Um, but yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys. Like, I am skeptical, but at the same time, I'm excited to see
Yeah.
where this is gonna go. But I just fear for the worst. I fear that this game, when it comes out, people are gonna love it for a horror game, like, and they're gonna compare it to Outlast and things. Going, oh, this is a great horror game, but it's not Resident Evil. And
Yeah.
then Resident Evil 2 comes out, and it is Resident Evil, and they're like, why the hell is this the remake of 2? Why aren't the main games like this? Why aren't we just going back to this? Why the hell are we getting Resident Evil 7 instead of this? This is what we want. Why? But they have said before as well, but before they even announced Resident Evil 7 was going back to horror, they did say that they were going to stick to the main titled games were going to be kind of action orientated, and the other games like Revelations were going to be more kind of horror driven and whatnot. But I think that's the complete opposite. They should have the subtitles to be actiony shit like they're doing with the Umbrella Corps game that's coming out, and the main title should be horror. So it does look like they're realizing that now, but I think there is going to be a bit of a problem if Resident Evil 2 comes out and it's exactly what fans have been asking for. The immediate reaction to that will be, alright, you've done that job well, let's get Resident Evil 3 remade exactly the same way. And it's going to follow up that way until we're like Resident Evil 8. What is it going to be? Is it going to be a first person horror experience like you give us with 7, or is it going to go back to the likes of 2 and 3?
In
They're
a,
just going to.
in a way, though, I think you're touching on something that might be a Capcom plan in a way. It's possible that Resident Evil 7, and if there's maybe a game or whatever after that, this could just be a detour for the time being until the remakes are all done and exhausted and they have no more, and then they go down that path again. But with new games, because it's hard for them to put out a new game following that old style if it's also coexisting with the remakes. So it's possible that this Resident Evil 7 formula is just a temporary solution until the remakes are exhausted, and then they then go back and mine that well again. But I guess we'll see.
The thing is, we do keep forgetting though. I'll just quickly jump in, Chris. The thing that we are forgetting as well that I mentioned earlier is we have had first-person Resident Evil games before. Yeah, they've been not quite like this, but we have had a game where you're in a first-person camera angle and you're pointing a gun and you're shooting enemies and stuff. We've had that with Resident Evil Survivor, we've had it with Gun Survivor 2, Code Veronica, and we've had it with Dead Aim, which is obviously your typical camera angle, but then goes into first person when you're going into action. So we have experienced like the action elements of the game in first person, so it won't be completely new to us, but I suppose just constantly being in first person and not being on rails or whatever, like the Umbrella Chronicle games and stuff, where you're going to have that constant feeling of, is someone following me, or is an enemy going to just come up and attack you from behind? That will be the suspense that the franchise has kind of been missing since number 5 and 6. So you are constantly going to be, on the edge of your seat. You're going to be kind of panicky, and that's what they're obviously wanting to incorporate back into this game. So that's all I was going to say to that, Chris, if you want to just go on.
Yeah. What I was going to say as well, on the subject of getting back to horror and wanting to keep the action in the side games, while Resident Evil 5 and 6 definitely were way too far in the direction of action, one thing to keep in mind is that Resident Evil was always the more action orientated of the horror games. Like, if Silent Hill and Siren were Ridley Scott's Alien, Resident Evil was James Cameron's Aliens. Like, it was always an action horror game. It was more in line with something like The Thing, which is a very action horror film, than it is in, say, something like The Ring, that's a slow brooding and quite psychological film, which is more like what Silent Hill is. So Resident Evil always has been more action orientated, and you don't want to lose that completely. But
It's
you
funny
don't
you
want to go
bring
too
up
far with it.
it's funny you bring up the Thing video game because that was pretty similar to Resident Evil in a lot of ways as well. So
Yeah.
I,
And
I,
one thing,
go ahead,
one
go
thing I
ahead.
just want to quickly stress before we have to wrap is, I'm not saying that I think the demo's bad, so the game will be because it's the same. Like, I do know and I do completely expect the final game to be different. But my issue is this is what they're putting out to sell me and what they have coming. This is all I can base on. And all they've told me with this demo is they have no ideas of their own. They have no ideas of their own. And when they're trying to copy other ideas, they're copying them badly. So it does leave me with an issue of a lack of faith in even though it's going to be totally different, what that different product is going to be.
Mm-hmm. I think, though, in a way that the demo, I guess, has done its job because here we are all talking about it.
well, dude,
It's
Yeah.
that's you're exactly on
Exceeded.
point with that because that's what Capcom wanted. They even openly admitted is like they wanted to release a demo that was going to be nothing like the main game in a sense because it gets people talking, and here we are talking about it, arguing
Yeah.
about it. That's what they want. Resident
Yeah.
Evil is officially back in the spotlight, so
We'll see how it goes. Well, that was our thoughts on Resident Evil 7 so far. We'll be sure to discuss the game going forward as more information inevitably comes out and we get ever closer to the game's release. Thanks for watching. As always, like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.